So hello everyone, welcome to SUNY IAS. Now we are well aware that you are eagerly waiting for the political science course and some of the lectures of that course on YouTube. Now already the batch have been started. Okay, you can go and check out the course, already is online, so you can go and check it out. But a lot of students were asking ki bhai, there has to be something on YouTube also. There's some important sessions of political science have to be on YouTube. Now the orientation session is already up. So if you have somehow landed up on this lecture for the very first time, make sure that first you go and you see the orientation lecture of political science, international relation, optional subject for those students who are appearing in 2024 CSE exam. Now why I'm saying so? Because that lecture is concerned about why you should take political science and international relation as an optional subject, who is the most apt aspirant who should opt for that subject, and then if you have opted that subject, that what are the do's and don'ts for preparing in the well calibrated manner, and then how SUNY IAS can help you in the best possible way. So all those things are discussed over there, so you please refer to that first and then come to this lecture. This lecture is going to be the very first lecture of political science and international relation for the foundation course. Okay, so in this lecture we are actually going to read the text which will be part of the main syllabus, also the main course which is on the platform. Okay, SUNY IAS web portal, you will have the access. Achha. Now few more do's and don'ts. Now if you are watching this lecture, there's a link below in the description. So you do first one thing. In that link there is a Google Drive link, most probably, that will take you to a PDF file. That PDF file will have the handouts which are prescribed for this course. Basically whatever I'm going to teach you in this lecture is there. Okay, the idea is very simple. The most difficult job in a optional subject is making notes. Now I totally understand that there's a subconscious thing that if you write your own notes you have a better understanding and all that is fine, but then you also have the time constraint thing. It's not like you have 3 years to prepare, so I can keep on teaching you, and then if I'll try to constrain those things within a cramped up system, then I might have to skip some things. So there has to be a bargain, there has to be a optimized position. Now what is the optimized position? Optimized position is this, that you keep these handouts with you whatever way you prefer. If you are okay with reading on a screen in a PDF format, that's fine. If you prefer to get it printed out and keep in a hard copy way, that is also fine with us. So you keep it with you. 95% of the text which I'll be delivering in the lectures is already there. So all you have to do is you have to do the markings and you have to refer, and in case there is something, because I'm speaking extempore, there will be a few things which will be added extra. Okay, so wherever you feel okay, I have given some extra information which is not there, you can add it down. There is a margin for that purpose too. So this is how we are going to proceed with the lectures. First of all, acha, few more things. In this lecture series we are going to start from the very basic concepts, very basic, and we'll be going in a very slow pace in the starting classes, making sure that it makes sense to each and everyone. Because one of the biggest difficulty in an optional subject is, sir, ki aadhe naam nahi samajh mein aa rahe. Half of the names I am not able to understand. Some of the time people keep on writing wrong spellings of the scholars, and this is prevalent in all the humanities subjects. Whichever humanities subject you are talking about, sociology, philosophy, psychology, anthropology, political science, everywhere. That is where also handouts comes very friendly. Okay, so keep this thing in mind, that you first download the handouts and then you can start the lecture. Okay, I hope you have taken a pause and now you have the handout next to you. Acha, so let's begin the discussion. Now in the political science and international relations topics, I have already explained in the orientation session that we are going to start things from Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, basically Western political thought. If you have seen that orientation session, you must be aware that that is where we are going to start. Political science starts from Plato, Aristotle. Your IGNOU notes, your standard books which are prescribed by Government of India will tell you always that we will start from political theory. But the problem is that if one starts from political theory, a lot big and huge concept can be bombarded on a very new students, and it becomes almost impossible for the students to understand or comprehend those topics at first. So the idea is simple, that we'll start in a storytelling mode. We'll start with, acha, there was a Aristotle Baba, prior to him there was a Plato Baba, and prior to him was a Socrates Baba, and prior to him were Heraclitus Baba, and all about them we'll discuss one by one. Okay, but even before we start that thing, we also need to know that, bhaiya, what is political science? If it's a humanities subject, then why we are even calling it political science? ये कैसी science है जो humanities में पढ़ाई जा रही है? Bhai, if there is a sociology, if there is a philosophy, there might be a politicology also. Why we are calling it political science? ऐसा क्या हो गया? And what actually is there in political science? What are the tools and tricks to read and understand political science? What are the approaches to study political science? These are certain things which you need to be aware before even we start that phase of Plato, Aristotle, and what we usually call in the standard parlance as Western political thought. Fine. So this is where we are going to start. Acha. So let's begin with a very basic point, and that's where we are going to start. What is politics? Okay, what is politics? So I leave out what is written on the screen, don't bother too much about it. It's just a standard meeting ki acha theek hai, there is a etymological meaning which can goes back to old Latin or basically Greek times, or then Latin idea of that wording. But the most common days where you have heard the word police or politics, these have all the etymologically coming from the same place. Okay, you have a word called police. Police hoti hai apne yahan, theek hai, cops and all. Yep. So that has that word pol, or, and that was also there in politics. Okay, and basically the origin of all these things is polis. P-O-L-I-S. Okay, P-O-L-I-S. What is this polis? So basically, back almost like 2,500 years back, 2,500 years back, in the Western civilization, in the Greece, in Greek society, okay, a city-state used to be called a polis. Okay. Now that nomenclature, that people started building a democratic system over there. I am hoping you must be aware of these small things. Abhi we will be discussing in great detail that what are different type of democracy, what role voting plays in democracy, but that's later on thing. If you are living in India, you must be aware कि democracy hoti kya hai ji. Democracy, what democracy is? Democracy is a very basic concept in which people vote and elect a representative. That representative then on their behalf participate in a decision making body that we usually call as parliament. ये बहुत basic सा concept है. अभी वहीं से लेके चलते हैं. Let's start from there only. Okay. So in a polis, that was a city state almost 2,500 years back, a lot of people in the Greek society decided that they will form a democratic system, a republican system, and from there this word became very popular because it was connected with masses. A lot of people had to participate in it, so it got acceptance of the people, and from there the very basic idea evolved that the process of managing and regulating a whole community was thereon being called as politics. Fine. The process of managing and regulating the whole community can be called a politics. Fine. Etymologically, one can trace back the very word politics to politikos, which literally means of or pertaining to the polis, that is the city state. That which is talking about or is connected to the issues and the problems and other things of a city state can be called a politics. Fine. That is where it is all coming from. चलिए एक बहुत सिंपल सी definition. This is not even the definition which I am expecting that you will write in the examination. वो भी बहुत दूर की बात है. अभी बस बहुत सिंपल सी बात इसको समझें कि what it is. ठीक है. Now the next point which you need to know is there was a scholar, and ये तो प्रथा है, I hope everyone knows this, that whether not anywhere else, but as long as your humanities optional papers are considered, okay, it's a basic concept is that you name drop. There's only few places in the world where name dropping is good. Your humanities optional subject is one such place. Okay, so name dropping is always good in humanities optional subjects. And whose names you are gonna drop? The name of the scholars. Why you have to drop the name of the scholars? Look, I am no great personality, neither do you. Okay, I am no great personality. I have no such big and broad experience that I will say something and the world leaders or the decision makers around the world will listen to me, and neither do you. So how we are going to make a statement, how we are going to make an argument? We will say our opinion, we'll say our argument, and then we'll say that look, this is not only what I am saying, even so and so person who is of this much prominence, is such an eminent scholar, also thinks on the similar lines. So basically what I am just doing, I am using some scholarly argument, some very big leader, some from somewhere, to substantiate my argument. And that is what you have to do in the whole political science paper. Okay, you might have a very innovative idea, but in the scientific field it is acceptable. In the scientific field it is acceptable. Why? Because in the scientific field it's simple actually, because an experiment will be done, and looking at the experiment you have proven that in the physical environment this is how it is done and dusted. No one can question you after that. But in the field of humanities there are various perspectives, and no logic is supreme, and therefore you always need to substantiate your argument, your ideas with some scholarly concepts, and that's where the names comes in. So let's start, and let me drop the very first name, the very thing from which all the students who ever think of taking humanities optional subject are terrified of. Okay, that is naam aayenge scholars ke, kaise yaad karoge? How you are going to remember so many names of the scholars? Okay, so we'll start from here. The very first name which I will talk about is Harold Laswell. Not a not very big scholar, but a very important scholar. So Harold Laswell, while talking about politics and all, and he's a scholar before the Second World War. Okay, so in 1936 he wrote a book. The name of the book was Politics. Who gets what, when, and how? Okay, if you will see in your handout, it's already written, but let me write it down on the board itself. So Harold Laswell wrote a book, Politics. Who gets what, when, and how? Fine. This book was published back in 1936, not last year, not in 2000s, and neither in 1980s. It was published in 1936. And in this book, he wrote something very specific. And Laswell was someone who was talking in terms of power concept. We haven't read again power as such now, but I am hoping that you are living in this society. You are born and brought up in this society. If you're watching this lecture, you must be at least somewhere around 17, 18, 19-year-old. So you know how power works. Okay, when you have this much capability to make someone do something, okay, it is called power. You have the power to make someone perform a particular task, whether they like it or not. Okay, so that is power. That's a crude example, crude idea, but we'll build on it further in this series only. But initially this is the idea you need to be aware of. So he used to talk in terms of power. So I have already given you a very basic definition of politics, that what is politics? the whole job, the whole work of managing and regulating the society or the community in which you are living is the work, or the thing is called as politics. Now somewhere around 1936, when the society were developed in the Western world, the governments were there, whether in Britain or America or Germany or Italy or Russia, there were governments. Okay, so now they were doing politics. So in these times, Laswell came up with this idea that what is politics in 1930s? In 1930s, he is saying that the job of distribution of resources is what going to be entailed in politics. The politics is basically the job, or politics is basically the work as per which it will be decided that who will get what, when and how. Fine. And what they are talking about? They are talking about resources. Resources of the society. Resources of the society. Okay. So as per Laswell, political science is study of changes in distribution of value pattern in society. You look at on the very first page number, okay, very first page, it is written that as per Harold Laswell, political science is study of changes in the distribution of the pattern in distribution of value pattern in society. Okay, every material good, everything in society has some value assigned to it. Now, who is getting what? Who is giving it to them? Why he or she is getting that particular thing of certain value? That is decided by those who are in power. And those who are in power actually perform this task, which is called as politics. It's a better definition which is acceptable, which was made in the 20th century and which is acceptable even in the 21st century. And you can easily quote it and write it. Fine. Now, he came up with this idea that these things only lead to the definition of the focal point to power dynamics. Okay, depends on the power. The argument was the focal point to be power dynamics, that everything is round around a very center foundational idea, and that is the power dynamics. Okay, so this is the very basic idea which you should be aware of, and then we can move forward. Now the very next concept where we have to talk, or what we have to discuss, is study of politics a science? It's a very genuine question. Anyone will ask you. I started our lecture with this discussion or this point only, that why even we are calling it science. एक काम कर लो ना, either you call it humanities or you call it science. भाई science तो physics होती है, chemistry होती है, humanities philosophy होती है. ये क्या बात हो गई, आपने उसको political science कह दिया और humanities में डाल दिया, फिर उसको political science की जगह politicology कह देते on the name or convention of sociology or philosophy. ऐसा कुछ वो नहीं किया. क्यों नहीं किया? What's the reason? Why even there is this question? That is something you need to understand. So again, when one is discussing the very basic concept, if you ask me a very basic definition, and again I would like you that you refer to your handout right now, and it is written over there that science entail a scientific inquiry. Okay, the very basic, for whether first if you have to check that whether the study of politics is a science or not, first of all you need to understand what science is, what all things can be called as science. वो तो पहले समझ में आया ना, फिर तो आप कंपेयर करके बताओगे कि ये साइंस है कि नहीं. First you need to understand what the hell is science itself, what should be called as science, what cannot be called as science, and then only you can compare the concept of political science on those parameters and realize that whether political science is science or not. That's how it is. So now basically science, anywhere, any science entail scientific, or science entails systematic inquiry. Okay, science entails systematic inquiry. Science entail systematic inquiry. Fine. The idea is to move towards absolute answer. Always, science will always try to ascertain an absolute value, absolute answer to something. Whether you are trying to solve a physics question or a chemistry question or a mathematics question, you will always see, because these are pure sciences, visibly you know that these are pure sciences. So in these only you know that what they are ultimately trying, they are always trying to get a specific pointed answer. Target answering or specific basically differentiated system is developed for this only system. Okay, so for this thing what they are going to do, how you will perform systematic inquiry. The easiest way of doing systematic inquiry is empirical methodology. The easiest way of performing systematic inquiry is empirical method. Now what is empirical method? Using number. The most easiest simple way of explaining empirical methodology is empiricism, using number system. If you can rationalize and you can assign value, digital or basically value set to something, it become numerically operable. And when you start assigning numbers to things, it becomes binarily differentiable. अब आप उसको exactly बता सकते हैं क्या गलत है क्या सही है. बाइनरी वर्ड्स में काम होता है ना, फिर या तो सही या तो गलत. अगर आप किसी भी चीज को, इफ यू कैन ब्रिंग एनी आइडिया एनी थॉट इन द नोशन ऑफ यस एंड नो, what can be better than this? The whole problem of the world is this only, that things are shaded. Okay, things are shaded. There is no black and white. Fine. And numerical system or empirical assessment, if can be done, that is what resolve these kind of problems. Fine. So you first understand that is what is science. Now whether political science is a science or not, that is the question. So there are scholars who sometimes say that yes, political science is a science. Political science is a science, and there are scholars who also say that political science is not a science. Now who are the scholars who say that it is science? We are not going to discuss right now. Why? It is more important that you first understand the concepts or the ideas which were propounded by these scholars, where they said that political science is a science. So let's discuss first those things. And similarly we'll also discuss first the ideas why there were certain scholars who are saying that political science is not a science. Let's first classify this idea and then we'll talk about कि किसने कहा था, वो बाद में देख लेंगे. पहले ये पढ़ते हैं कि कहा क्या था. Let's first understand what they have stated. Okay, so the very first idea is the concept of, let's take a hypothetical situation and let's consider political science is a science. Let's check it out. Let's consider political science is a science. Now if I have considered, or I have, suppose this is a hypothetical situation and I have accepted this thing, it's a science. Now I have to give some supportive argument. So what could be supportive argument? What I have seen around me, looking at which I can say no, it is actually scientific, it is empirically proved. There, for scientific or for science there has to be some empirical agenda, there has to be some empirical tools. So democracy is work, we live in a democracy, we see election happening every now and then. What we see in those elections, that people based on public's opinion, people calculate and people opine or people predict who is going to win the elections. If you are not aware, Google it. There is a whole stream of school of basically political analysis. You will always see that after every election there are so many people who are sitting in the TV screen in chota dibbas, and what they are doing, they are telling you that who is going to win this election, who is going to lose this election, what their predictions are. Yahi hota rehta hai. Who these people are? These people are called as cephalogists. What they are doing, they are using the statistical methods available, using the mathematical tool of probability to analyze and give us political science agenda. That is what they are doing. By forming a government, predicting what the outcome of a democratic process will be is a political thing, isn't it? And then these people are using the scientific ways or the mathematical models or probability to do it. So can't we say it's basically scientific in this manner? Yes. But all this process which I have just told you, that going and taking people's opinion, doing empirical research, going from village to village, area to area, doing survey of 4,000, 5,000 people, and then expanding the value, and then expanding or basically doing a regression to expand the value to a bigger text. This is called as empirical analysis. This empirical analysis, this systematic empirical analysis is basically when performed on a huge set of people. It is called as behavioralism. Okay, we will discuss this idea, behavioralism. We will discuss this idea later on also in our classes also only. So even if it doesn't make sense as a word on its own, no issues. You just need to understand that when this happened, when behavioralism, because what they are trying to do, they are trying to use empirical methodology to analyze the behavior of the people at large, isn't it? So this is using a scientific method. This is using empirical method for the work of politics. So political science is a science. Similarly, one more example. You will see that suppose that very election we are talking about. Let's suppose that election took place. After the election, coalition government started waiting for. One needed 283 seats. इतनी चाहिए होते हैं अभी इंडिया में, 282, 283 चाहिए होते हैं आपको. Suppose someone had 240. They go to a smaller party. They said, "भाई 50, 50. If you can support us, 50 of you." Okay. For so many time, again and again in India, there have been so many coalition government. From the period between 1996 onwards till 2014, there was continuously coalition governments only in power. Fine. So, when these coalitions are forming, what you are thinking, on what grounds this coalition are getting formed? Ideology? No. The sheer number value. I have 240, I need 43 more. Some other group party has 50 and they are asking for least amount of work done in their favor. So let's take their support. This is usually happens. Usually this only happens. So what they are doing? They are doing a very cold-hearted, rational decision making. Okay, and this is famously called in the stream of a world of political science as the rational, theory. Okay. Now let me write this thing again. In case if you don't remember this, no issues, but you need to understand rational choice theory. They are making a rational choice. Okay, they are not getting impacted by some ethical ideas or some moral ideas. They are not getting impacted by some ideological concerns. No, they are making a very cold-hearted, rational decision depending upon what are the immediate benefits they will have. Okay, this has happened all the time. It happens only, not only in India, wherever this kind of parliamentary system is there, this happened. Fine. Whether in America, we will see in Britain, the Scottish parties, many a time they come in contact with the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, depending on in which term the Scotland will get better favorable terms. It happens all around. Fine. So you just see it that these are just two examples which proves that political science is a science. Political science is a science. But then there are instances which again proves that political science is not a science. Let's check that also. Political science is not a science. Now, in favor of this, what options, what all we have seen? Let's take the same example, the election example only. So, I have just told you that so many surveys are conducted, and depending on the outcome of the survey, it is decided or it is predicted that who are going to win. But then many a time you will find that a lot of scholars, a lot of time you will see that the predictions get wrong. The things which are predicted don't really happen. That also do happens. In those circumstances, the basic assumption, if you are living in India, that is कि जी caste वाला factor consider नहीं हुआ, ठीक है, या religion या linguistic या region, because some other region, something other vital tool with constraints we didn't able to consider. Now that's a problem with empirical methodology. Let me make you understand it here itself. no matter what you do in using probability, you cannot get 100% answer. थोड़ी probability पढ़ी होगी कभी 10th standard तक, अभी अगर आपने, तो आपको पता है that the maximum probability of anything could be 0.999999. In the world of politics, in the world of probability, in the world of statistics, there is no exact value 1. Fine. There is always a hope for something else to happen. Okay. So here also many a time you will see that role of religion, role of caste in electoral system is unpredictable. The role of, or specifically for India, but in other countries other things play this role. Role of religion, role of caste. For example, if you see in United States, then role of race comes into picture, as it do happened in 2008 Barack Obama's election. Okay, so role of religion, caste, race, all these things, these are unpredictable. It happens so many times. You might have heard about it, that yes, the chief minister has done extensive work, but I have to vote to this particular person because that person is from my caste or my religion or my region or my territory, or he speaks in that language. There are many values set based on which we as individual do assign our vote to someone, even though these things are not rational. When these things are not rational, they are not calculable by any stream of science. And if you consider from that perspective, you can say that political science should not be called as a science. This particular idea is called as, and you can see in your notes on the very first page itself, interpretivism. You have to interpret many things, and when you are interpreting, you have to take a lot of those constraints into account which doesn't have a foundational base. Many superficial ideas come into picture. Okay. Similarly, you will see one more here. You might have heard about these words called as postmodernism. Okay. Now, it will not make a lot of sense right now, that's fine, but you need to understand that in our society, for example, again, let's see the very tumultuous example of Jammu and Kashmir. So one of a very big issue in the politics of Jammu and Kashmir is the politics of identity. Politics of identity and representation is a very big issue in Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, the way the native population of Jammu and Kashmir looks towards the central government, the way the rest of the country's people look towards a lot of people who live in Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, there is something going on. There is not everything is streamlined, not everything is very smooth. Okay, that's a reality. We know, you know, everyone knows that. So political phenomena many a times are shaped by power relations. Okay, discourses and subjective interpretation. You think something to be in a particular manner and I think that to be in a different manner. What is true for you is false for me. What is true for me is false for you. तुम जिसको सही कहोगे हम उसको गलत कह देंगे और तुम कुछ नहीं कर सकते. It goes like this. That also happens in politics. Fine. So many a time you will see that predicting or expecting that something will happen, but exactly opposite thing happens. Human beings are highly unexpected, or you cannot be assured what human beings are going to do in any time, anywhere. Okay, they are very unexpected or unvibrant behavior we have. So scholars challenge the idea that politics can be studied objectively and scientifically. There are a lot of scholars who always say that hoping to get to know all the constraints is impossible. And since that is impossible, it is also impossible to bring any objectivity or scientifically done analysis of politics. And therefore, this whole idea that it is impossible to do an objective study of politics of a particular region. This idea was propounded by scholars who came in 1980s, and they are usually called as post-modernist They are many a time also another faction very close, post-structuralist. Now, the concept of postmodernism and post-structuralism will be taught to you in later stages. You don't have to worry about it. It is there in your syllabus. You have to know it. Not only you have to know it, you have to even apply it, because it will be your job to analyze that who is a postmodernist, who is a post-structuralist, but that is for the later classes. Right now you just need to understand that what is this whole idea of political science, whether it is even a science or not, and I just wanted to give you certain examples of that. Fine. So you understand postmodernism and post-structuralism, the basic ideas. Okay. Now this whole thing I explained, that some scholars say it's a science, some scholars say it's not a science, done. Okay. It's there in your handout and it's right here. So all what I have explained you with example and everything is right there on the screen, and it's also on the handout in the on the very page number 1. Fine, on the very page number 1. Now let's move to the next idea. Next idea is about the whole study of politics, how you will even do the study of politics. So let me explain that thing also to you. Let's go back to a plain sheet and let's start that discussion. Study of politics, how you will study politics. Ab baat kar, chaliye baat ho gayi, we understood, we got a basic idea that how politics works and all. How you will start studying politics? There is a philosophical way and there is a science way. Since we are obviously the subject political science and international relation is the topic of the subject which you have opted for, so surely we are going to focus more on political science. But then political philosophy is also, you must have heard about somewhere. So there are two of these concepts, okay, two of these tracks actually, political philosophy and political science. Okay, they have relationship also among each other and they have differences also. They have relationship and differences both, so keep that thing also in mind. Both the field of political science and political philosophy are talking about political concepts. They are talking about principles and systems. They are talking about various political concepts, they are talking about principles, and they are talking about political systems. Okay. Even to give you a better idea, the political philosophy part is actually the foundational idea. Before you go on the scientific terms, you need some philosophical idea. ये तो एक basic सा notion है. Even if you have not studied any humanities subject, एक basic concept क्या होता है, जो philosophy की जो बातें होती हैं वो बड़ी ऊंची होती हैं, वो तो जाने दो. ये एक basic logic कहते हैं ना लोग. Because those are the normative thought. Over the period of time, society have reached certain principles or have made or evolved certain principles which are studied and analyzed and expected and evaluated by philosophical methodologies. Fine. So that thing you have to keep in mind. Now, the theories and principles developed in the field of political philosophy can inform and shape the study of empirical phenomena in political science. Again, political philosophy is the foundational idea. Okay, and political science is actually the superstructure. Okay, the foundation and the superstructure. You have a building, then if you have a building in front of you, then you have a structure in front of you that is visible to you, that is the superstructure. That part of the building which is deep down inside is the foundation, which is provides the actual strength to the building in front of you. So that building is something which is political science. But that whole thing is based on certain concepts, certain principles. Okay, and these are discussed and developed using the political philosophies. Okay, so you have just basic idea of this. Then you also need to understand political science always talks about what is going on in the world, what is going on in the world, how can one explain a particular issue. For example, there is a going on crisis in WTO regarding what should be the trade tariffs, or how the rich countries, or country like, not rich, but country like China should be stopped from dumping their products as a cheaper good in a other developing countries like India and Bangladesh and all that. Fine. Now, you can develop a political theory for explaining these things. Okay. What is always defined by political theory. What ought to be is where political philosophy comes into picture. Always remember this thing, that what is where political science is important. Political philosophy is something which talks towards what ought to be, क्या होना चाहिए. Fine, you keep this thing in mind. The conceptual analysis of political ideas and principles, the conceptual analysis will be done always in the field of philosophy. So political philosophy is going to talk about those ideas. Fine. On the implementation stage, the empirical study of political system, behavior, their immediate outcome, these are some places where political science becomes more important. Okay. So now, for example, political science is something which talks about normative methods. Over the period of times, there have been norms in the society. Over the period of time, society develops their own norms, and these norms, you will see in the long run, are helpful, are really helpful, and they only evolve into principle. All what pertains to doing an analysis of these things is political philosophy. Fine. So that again you have to keep in mind. Now, the next point is all the logical reasoning, all the philosophical inquiry, ये ऐसा होना चाहिए कि नहीं होना चाहिए, will be discussed in political philosophy. ये ऐसा क्यों है, this will be discussed in political science. Quantitative, so you need to understand the focus of political philosophy. First of all, the focus of political philosophy is the conceptual analysis of political ideas and political principles. The focus of political science is empirical study of political system, behavior, and their respective outcomes. When you move from focus, the targeted focus, to the method used by the scholars of political philosophy and the scholars of political science. So the methods which are used by the scholars of political philosophy is basically the philosophical inquiry and logical reasoning, whereas the method used by the scholars of political science are quantitative and qualitative research methods. This very thing, empirical methods, the statistics, ठीक है, वो वोटर डेटा सेट लेके उसका एक्सेल शीट बना के प्लॉट करते हैं, दैट इज क्वांटिटेटिव एनालिसिस. आपने क्वांटिटी ली और डेटा एनालिसिस कर दिया. सो दैट इज वर्क ऑफ पॉलिटिकल साइंटिस्ट. ओके, दीज आर द मेथड्स यूज्ड बाय देम. Now when you know the focus, targeted focus, and also the method, then you need to understand the purpose which political philosophy and political science are targeting. So the purpose of political philosophy is to develop normative theories and principles based on which the society can grow. The purpose of political philosophy is to develop normative theories based on which the society will grow. How the country should be. What should be the concept of nationalism? Should nationalism be important than patriotism or not? These are bigger questions. What is the very basic idea of citizenship? Should citizenship be related to nationalism, or there should be global citizens? These are the issues which will be discussed in the field of political philosophy. Immediately in the present time, what are the laws of citizenship? This will be discussed in the field of political science, and that was political philosophy. So to understand, explain predict political phenomena and inform policy makers based on empirical evidence is the main purpose of political science. Now you need to understand what is the scope of political philosophy and political science. Now since we have already discussed, the scope of political philosophy is much bigger. It is the political science which are looking into the nitty-gritties. Okay, institutional behaviors, public policy, These are political science related issue, and since these are worldly affairs, and that's why it is the subject for you in the UPSC. The political philosophy is not a subject in UPSC. Why? Because it has a bigger issue at hand. What is liberty? Okay. Is me being fully liberal will create a difficulty for you. If I have complete liberty, I'll be free to do anything. In that situation, will your liberty be hampered? Or we both can maintain our complete liberty at once? These kind of questions are discussed in political philosophy and not political science. Similarly, the basic idea of democracy. Is the democracy most apt method human beings have ever evolved to run the state, or there are better methodology available? We don't know. That's a question for political philosophers to discuss. Fine. So these are some of the basic issues or basic differences also between political philosophy and political science, which you should be aware of. Fine. Chaliye. So these are, we just discussed this thing in the relationship also. It's also there in your handout, so you can refer to it. And then the study of politics, political philosophy and political science is actually what we have discussed just now, is written on the screen and you can refer it. Fine. Chalo. Now let's move forward and let's go to the concept of political science and what all we have to discuss. So dekho, in political science, again, in political science we have concepts of political theory, the various theories, just like in the science, in politics, political, and just like any other science like physics, chemistry, mathematics, which have a lot of theories, political science also have theories. So there will be political theories, we'll be discussing about some of them. There is a whole other stream called as political thought. We'll come to each one's definition. Then we have to discuss the comparative politics. And finally, we have to discuss international relation. Fine, all the four things. So let's discuss one by one. What is political theory? Political theory. You must have heard about a lot of theories in science, in physics, in chemistry. Okay? F equals to G m1 m2 by r square. Okay? Force equals to mg, mass multiplied by gravity. E equals to mc square. These are concepts which were built through theories. Okay? Now, systematic and abstract analysis of political concept, principles and ideologies aimed at developing normative framework for political actions are called as political theories. For example, we, in the theoretical sense, but on the humanities side, for example, B.R. Ambedkar wrote a book. It's a very thin book. It's called as Annihilation of Caste. So B.R. Ambedkar was told he has to give us a lecture in Lahore and on what can be the methods of removing the caste divide. Back in 1926, 1927, he was asked to come over to Lahore and give this speech, or basically a lecture on the topic ki kya kya kar sakte hain, what all can we do in our society so that caste system could be, the issue of caste system can be resolved, untouchability and all that. Good. So Dr. Ambedkar wrote actually a lecture, full-fledged, and the whole idea he propounded in it was the only way to resolve the caste-based crisis in India in 1920s was annihilation of the caste itself, that you remove the whole caste system at once. That is the only way. Now, You need to understand that Gandhi ji and other scholars or other leaders were totally in favor or supportive the idea of that untouchability is wrong and it should not be practiced. They were also in favor of that those who have been historically muzzled, historically oppressed should be supported by the society. But even Gandhi ji never derided the Chaturvarna Parampara in totality. He never said these things, that the whole Chaturvarna Parampara, the fourfold caste system itself is wrong. Okay? So when Ambedkar said this thing, that the solution of the crisis of caste divide in India is annihilation, annihilate कर दो पूरे caste system को, पूरे caste system को ही बाहर निकाल दो, खत्म कर दो. It was blasphemous almost, so much so that the committee which called him said that mat aiye, and his talk, his lecture was cancelled. Although since Dr. Ambedkar has already written the text, he got it published and became one of the seminal work of Dr. Ambedkar, called as Annihilation of Caste. Why I am telling you this over here? Because I had to explain you, or I have to give you an example of humanities theory which will make sense to you and you will be able to connect. So what Dr. Ambedkar did? Ambedkar provided a theory. Theory क्यों use करते हैं mathematics में? Why we use theory in physics, chemistry and mathematics? To solve problems? Answers निकालने के लिए theory use करते हैं ना. So here also Dr. Ambedkar gave a solution to a question through a theory. What the theory was? The theory was, the question is caste crisis in India, caste abnormalities. So he came up with a solution. The solution was through a theory. The theory propounded caste annihilation, annihilation of caste. Fine. So it's written in your text. I'll read it from there. B.R. Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, which critique the caste system in India and advocates for social and political equality, emphasizes the importance of constitutional safeguard and the abolition of untouchability. It was a theory propounded by him. Basic theory. Now, if I've given you a basic idea that the abstract analysis of a political system has been developed to develop a normative framework for political action in the coming times, then it is called as political theory. Then if this is political theory, then what is political thought? Now, the political thought is more of a overarching idea. Over the period we saw that historical evolution take place, and historical evolution take place on all the perspective. So over the period we saw that the form of democracy evolved. For example, leave out the Indian case. Indian case is a very new one. But if you even see the British model of governance, the very first time the people in UK, United Kingdom, or what is specifically the core place, that is England, they got the right of what is we know as habeas corpus back in 1215, that is called as Magna Carta. Then somewhere around 1688, you will see that a glorious revolution happened, and the king was no more the supreme person, the sovereign. It became the sovereignty moved to parliament. And thereon you will see that participation of people increased in 1832, and thereon you will see that further liberalization in the game of democratic participation of people increased over the period of time. And it was only in 1928 that all the women in Britain also above the age of 21 got the voting right, and subsequently in 1969 that 21 was also reduced to 18. इंडिया का एग्जाम्पल क्यों नहीं दिया? बिकॉज वी काइंड ऑफ एब्रप्टली इम्प्लीमेंटेड द डेमोक्रेटिक मॉडल इन 1951-52. Okay, but you see over here a whole evolutionary model of democratic practices have been evolved. So historical evolution can be understood in a best possible manner by understanding the evolution of the thought. So what is political thought? Political thought is historical evolution and context of political ideas, reflecting diverse perspective and intellectual traditions. Now, so we understood one of the particular theory, that is annihilation of caste, that was propounded by Ambedkar. Now, when we are talking about political thought of Dr. Ambedkar, and which is also there in your syllabus, in Indian political thought, we have to understand B.R. Ambedkar's ideas. So studying the influence of Ambedkar ideas on the present times, as well as to study the circumstances and other scholars who existed prior to Ambedkar, who influenced Ambedkar, will in totality provide you the political thought of Dr. Ambedkar. So on one side I gave you an example of political theory which was propounded by Dr. Ambedkar, on the other side I explained you what political thought of Dr. Ambedkar is. So don't get confused between political theory and political thought ever again, because a lot of students do get. तो एक समझ में नहीं आ रहा सर अभी तक theory और thought क्या है. अरे thought is a historical evolution of idea which happens over a period of time, and theory is a mere normative principle which have been evolved to develop a framework so that on the immediate basis a system can be developed. That's it. Okay, I hope it must have made some sense. Now what I have just explained to you is written over here: political theory, political thought. I'll just read it with you so that it will make more sense to you. The systematic and abstract analysis of political concepts, principles and ideologies aimed at developing normative framework for political actions and organization is a theory. Historical evolution and context of political ideas reflecting diverse perspective and intellectual traditions that have shaped politics over the period of time is political thought. Okay, in both the cases I specifically I focused on giving you the same or related example so that it will make more sense, because comparative analysis here will provide you better understanding. So we see here that Dr. Ambedkar talked about a very specific theory that is called as annihilation of caste. Okay, and over here we see that stating the influence of Ambedkar's ideas on the drafting of Indian Constitution and the inclusion of provisions that promote social justice, that will be covered under political thought and not political theory. Okay, so this is also idea how you need to understand the difference between political thought and political theory. And believe me, in the previous examination there have been direct question, what is political thought, what is political theory, 10 mark question, you have to write somewhere around 150 words. Many a time a question comes, differentiate between political thought and political theory. Such simple things now. And they will also be somewhere around 150 words. You just write 2 or 3 pointers, okay, and it is done. Suppose, now this is a very basic idea. Now let's move forward and let's discuss that, okay, fine, you understood from the very beginning of the idea that whether political science is even a science or not, and you also understand that what all is entailed. There are 2 more concepts which need to be understood when we'll be talking, and we'll have done political thought, we have done political theory. Thought. Theory is there, thought is here. Now there are 2 more concepts, that is comparative politics and international relation. Now I'll give you a basic brief idea of comparative politics, but it will be covered obviously in paper 2 part 1, comparative politics. Now what comparative politics is about, what they are saying. Now comparative politics, as the name subject is talking about comparing. Suppose you must have seen, if you are preparing for your GS subjects also, you will see every now and then there is some index, and there is some index in which it is said that India is so and so on the global hunger index, India is on so and so position on the freedom of expression index, or freedom of press index, or India is so and so on the crime listing, or India is so, and Indian democracy is so and so on the democratic listing. Okay, they are ranking given to India, our country. Now what I am saying is, if the ranking is given to India and other countries, they must have been compared. They have come up with their small indices of their own using which they have compared, but they surely have compared. That comparison work is basically what comparative analysis is. Now over here we will understand the various theoretical tools which are available to compare not only the countries, not only the different institutional political models, but also the ideas or the philosophical, something as extent philosophical ideas. Fine. So that will entail in the comparative politics. Okay, there will be David Easton's model which will be focused most upon, but building on that post-structuralist model and structural functional model and all those things will be covered. So that will be done, but that will be done later on. And similarly, after that the final stage will be international relation. Now a lot of students think that in international relations it's not like international relations which is there in your GS paper 2, that 5 question aate hain and you write the factual stuff and it will be done. No, there is a reason that international relation is paper 2 section B. There is a reason for that. And what is the reason? The reason is very simple, that international relation is not only just the factual information, but you are expected to know everything about the political thought. You need to understand what are India's different constitutional reasoning and the ways in which the government of India works, and then you move towards international political theories, and then finally you move towards the factual information, so that even when you are writing the answers of international relations or immediate current affairs international relations answer in political science optional paper, you will be able to command such a capability that you can quote scholars from the previous 3 sections easily. Okay, and that is why it is kept over there. Now, that is also one point, so keep that in mind. Now let's move to the next point, that is, you need to understand where we can start. So we have to start from, look, I told you that a very basic idea is to start from political theory, and this is where IGNOU standard books are also defining it. Okay, but the problem is starting from political theory is there will be bombardment of a lot of theories on you. Okay, critical theory, this theory, that theory, and you will not, it will not make much of a sense. So it has been a pratha in the field that we will start our studies from political thought. And for understanding the political thought also, we will opt for the historical approach. Historical approach to political thought. Historical approach to political thought. Okay. Now, what it actually entails, the historical approach to political thought? Again, when you are going to start learning about anything, if I'll just tell you that rationalism and pragmatism is the way forward in world politics. Rationalism and pragmatism is the way forward in the world politics. You will immediately say, what is rationalism? What is pragmatism? And what you have seen in the world politics that you are telling me all these things. So that's why pushing these kind of direct concept onto you is not the correct way. Instead of it, if I'll tell you that in the 16th century Italy, in the post or during the period of Renaissance only, there was a guy whose name was Niccolo Machiavelli, who was living in Medici ruled state of Florence, and over there he wrote a very seminal work called as The Prince, in which he propounded some ideas where he explained that what are the ethical and moral constraints of the ruler, and which are totally different from the ethical and moral constraint on the subjects or the people living in the country. And from there, if I build the whole idea that what is rationalism, what is pragmatism, how a ruler should behave, how a individual should behave, it will surely make a lot more sense to you. Because I am giving you a context, I am providing you a context. Okay, I am making sure that the whole story has been told to you in an evolving manner. Since I am giving you information about the past, it is always better. So learning from the past is also there. And since you'll have an idea of the world in which we are talking about, you will have ideological roots also. And then we can start, since it's an evolutionary study, we can keep on comparing the different ideas. And since there will be a somewhat no exponential change or no all of a sudden spot on change, but a evolving concept rise, you will also be able to comparatively analyze those ideas. I know that the moment I have told you that, okay, there was a Niccolo Machiavelli who came up with this idea that the ethical and moral standards of the king or the ruler or the monarch have to be different from the ethical and moral standards of the individual or the citizens or the subjects, then immediately you must have thought about, हाँ अभी भी ऐसे ही होता है. It must have clicked on in your mind that, हाँ, if you see right now also, that what creates biggest fear in mind of a common man is not a very big issue for any big politician. आपके घर पे सीबीआई आ जाए, आप परेशान हो जाओगे. किसी बड़े पॉलिटिशियन को देखो, हाँ आए थे, चाय पिला के भेज दिया. फाइन. सो व्हाट इज द बिगेस्ट एथिकल एंड मॉरल क्राइसिस फॉर यू इज अ मॉर्निंग की चाय के डिस्कशन का इशू फॉर सम बिग पॉलिटिशियन. Okay, so what I'm trying to make, what we have done just now, while I was giving this example, I have done a comparative analysis of the modern time rulers of the states and the medieval time rulers. It will further strengthen your understanding for modern times only. So this approach always is much more helpful, and this is the very approach in which we have to study. And it's not only that I am telling you in this approach, you go anywhere, this is the very approach everyone will take. Fine. So historical approach to political thought, this we have done already. The historical approach to study of political thought will start with the will provide you a context, then will evolve evolution of political thought, learning from the thought past, understanding ideological roots and comparative analysis. Fine. अच्छा, ये तो एक basic idea हो गया. That we will take historical approach to study political thought. Through those thoughts, then we will move towards, while studying about the evolutionary thought of that particular time period, we will look into the theories which evolved during those time period, and so we'll also understand the political theory. This is the approach we are going to take. But on what we will apply these thoughts? If I am telling you that historical approach to study political thought, but political thought of what? There has to be some text, there has to be some scholars about whom we have to study. There have to be someone, na? And about there are some people, so what we are going to study? There is one person X. Do we study the life of X? Do we study the text written by that X? What we are going to study? So usually we read the text. Usually we read the text. The big scholars in last 2500 years, from the ancient Greek times to modern times, in the Western world as well as Indian society, there are a lot of seminal texts which have been written. And reading these texts will give you information about not only the societies, but also the way of politics, the way the politics works in these societies. And that is what we have to study. Fine. So let's move then. And you need to understand that what we have to do. So basically, we have to understand political thought. We have already told you the history of political thought, or that way we have to study. So in the political thought, there are three things which one have to understand. In the political thought, there are three things. The thought is a evolutionary idea. So evolutionary idea will have everything. It will have theory, it will have philosophy, and the third way is history. So one way forward could be to study the political theories of all the time. But as I told you, if I'll start dropping names of various theories or bombard it on you, you will get just confused and nothing will come out of it. If I'll start pushing more and more philosophies on you, that will also just jeopardize the whole mission of making you understand the thing. So political philosophy, or directly jumping to political philosophies, will also not mean much sense. So what is the way forward? The way forward is the history of the political thought. The way forward is to study history of political thought. And since all the ideas are evolutionary in nature, while studying this only, we will understand the theories and the philosophies of those times also. Easy? Now, in the world we live, we have a very binary distribution. We have a Eastern world and we have a Western world. Since we have a colonial legacy, we have a colonial past of ours, that means we have been colonized. We have a feeling of us versus them. There are Western world, which in the modern sense of the things, if you'll see, are materialistically more advanced and developed, and the Eastern world culturally is heterogeneous. Okay, culturally still has a broader framework, but materialistically don't find itself on the same standing. Under these situations, when we have to study the history of political thoughts, we will be studying in the framework of Eastern political thought and the Western political thought. Eastern political thought and Western political thought. Eastern political thought and Western political thought. In the Eastern world, what are countries you know? There are a lot of them. Let me tell you this. If you go to South Korea, they will teach you a Korean political thought. But obviously, Korean political thought is not that of a big of a issue unless and until you are in South Korea or North Korea. So we can distribute, and this is actually a 20th century man-made concept, that we focus on the idea something like a African political thought, Chinese political thought, and Indian political thought. The African political thought, Chinese political thought, and Indian political thought. Obviously, you are giving examination in India and not neither in any of the 54 African country nor in China. So we will be focusing only on the Indian political thought. We will be focusing on Indian political thought. And similarly, in the Western world, we have a whole period. In the Western world, we have a whole period. That is, we have Greek political thought. Then we had Roman political thought. Then we had a period which is also called as the Black Age, okay, of Europe, from 4th century CE, 4th century CE till 14th or 15th century. And then we have the modern political thought. Now, in your defined syllabus, the Roman political thought and Black Age is not given that much importance. There are few things here and there, but that I'll explain. For example, the Stoicism, the concept of Stoicism is of very much in the news. Okay, it is all over the internet. People say, "हाँ, stoic बन जाओ." ठीक है? So मैं थोड़ा बहुत बता दूंगा, लेकिन you don't have to figure it. That's not in your syllabus outrightly. Similarly, in the period between 4th and 14th, 15th century, the church was the supreme power. And therefore, I'll give you some idea that who were the scholars, what were the ideas, but it is also not going to be asked as such in the examination. The focus is on the Greek political thought and the modern political thought starting from Machiavelli. Okay, so we have to start from the pre-Socratic scholars, someone like a Parmenides, someone like a Heraclitus, then we'll move to Socrates, then we'll move to Plato, then we'll move to Aristotle. And from Aristotle, we'll directly jump to the Machiavellian phase, that is the 16th century CE. And from Machiavelli, then we'll move to Thomas Hobbes, then we'll move to John Locke, then we'll move to Rousseau and J.S. Mill, and up till Hannah Arendt, and then the modern scholars like Charles Taylor and all. That is how we have to take it. In between, there will be Karl Marx also. Fine. So in the Western political thought, we know Plato, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, J.S. Mill, Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, Hannah Arendt, Charles Taylor, all these people we have to study. Indian political thought, similarly, we have to focus on right from the period of Buddhist literature. Okay, the Buddhist and prior to Buddhism, there was the ideas of Dharma Shastra. So we'll look into it. The ideas of propounded in Dharma Shastra, then Artha Shastra, then Buddhist tradition, then the ideas propounded by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, Aurobindo Ghosh, his idea of Swaraj we'll be talking about. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Gandhiism itself is a concept. B.R. Ambedkar's opinion and arguments we'll discuss. M.N. Roy we have to work on. Okay, so these are the scholars whose study we have to perform, making sure that the political thought of these periods will be done. Now what all I explained you is here on this slide. So you will see on the screen that history of political thought, Eastern political thought and Western political thought. The Indian political thought has Dharma Shastra, Arthashastra, Buddhist tradition and all that. The Chinese and African political thought I have not to be covered in our class, so you don't have to worry. The Western political thought, you actually need just the Greek political thought and the modern political thought. The Roman and the mid ages can be left out. Okay, so that is how you have to do. It has to be, it is on your handout page number 3, which is uploaded, so you can check it out. Okay, now if this much is done, let's move forward and let's talk about the next important idea, and that is, so we have to study these people, and we will do the study of these people through their seminal work, their text, their writings. The arguments propounded by these people will give us not only an opinion of what these people used to think, but also a lot of information about the period in which they were living. So how we can do analysis of their text? So first of all, you need to understand that what we have to study is classical text. Classical texts. What are the different classical texts we are going to talk about? What is a classical text? That is a more important question. Now look, there are a lot of influential texts around the world. आप हो सकता है आपने कोई book पढ़ी हो and that book has influenced you enough to behave or change or bring change in your behavior. Okay, that is totally acceptable. But you need to understand that there are certain texts which were influential 2000 years back, which were influential 1000 years back, which is influential even now. So that means these texts has a clause of eternality. These are eternal texts. These texts are eternal. Almost all the religious texts, or basically जिनको हम धर्म ग्रंथ कहते हैं, are considered to be eternal, whether it is Bhagavad Gita or Quran or Bible, okay, or Ramayana, okay, Ramcharitmanas or Ved, Upanishad. All these texts are called as some classical texts. But since they are religious texts, I won't be giving example of those. वो छोड़ देते हैं उसको अभी जाने के लिए, और हम अपना focus रखते हैं highly rationalized discussion पे. So classical text हम कौन सा ले लेते हैं? ऐसा कोई text जिस पे you will see that maybe people were getting influenced by it by in 19th century. People also got influenced from it in 20th century. In the 21st century also there is something to learn from it. Because these texts usually talks about human behavior. Usually these texts always talks about what? Human behavior. Fine. So for example, William Shakespeare has written a lot of books. Romeo Juliet. It was read in the 17th century, it was read in the 18th century, it was read in the 19th and the 20th and the 21st century, people are also reading it. Macbeth और Othello पे तो फिर विशाल भारद्वाज मूवी बना देते हैं, and it is world famous. Even now when you recreate the story of Macbeth, Othello in the modern times India, it almost moves in in a smooth manner that if you don't tell people that these were actually writings of William Shakespeare, people will not even understand. So that shows the eternality, that shows the very sense of eternalism in these texts. Now it's not only that only William Shakespeare has written something like this. Obviously there have been scholars are all around the world. If you'll just read, if you are in Hindi literature, there is someone like Munshi Premchand. You read any of his work, the way he shows the plight of poor in our society, the farmers. There is a very seminal work of his called as Godan. It was written in the early 20th century, but it is read even now, and it has impact on people even in the 21st century. Right now only few, there is a movie, Tamil movie called as PS1 and PS2. Okay, those are based on Ponnayin Selvam. Ponnayin Selvan was written by Kalki Krishnamurti in 1944. Okay, it was a text written by Kalki Krishnamurti in 1944 about the Cholas who were there in 9th, 10th and 11th century, the imperial Cholas. And you will see that when the movie is made right now, people are still getting influenced, people are still liking it. Why? Because there is a sense of eternalism in the text. Rabindranath Tagore wrote about Devdas, and since then Devdas has been made twice. That's a eternal text because it talks about human behavior. The fundamental nature of human behavior don't change. You have to keep this thing in mind. Okay, the technology can advance, fine, the technology can always move and advance. पहले लोग लव लेटर लिखते थे, अब लोग व्हाट्सएप कर लेते हैं, लेकिन बातें वही होती. So you have to keep these things in mind, the sense of eternalism. Now that eternalism is not only true about human behavior. We know it very well that combination of people basically makes a society. If Mr. A behaves a certain manner, Mr. B behaves a certain manner, Mr. C behaves a certain manner, the combination of all these people is going to give you a society. So society will be the outcome of the value set, behavior, doings and misdoings of everyone. So keep that thing in mind. Okay, keep that thing in mind. So in the society also, the eternalism thing of classical text works. Now one more thing about classical text, let me tell you. All the classical texts, and somehow you will always see they are talking about making a better form of society. They are always talking about making a better form of state. Almost every time they will be talking of some seminal work like this. Or for that matter, those texts which we will be talking in political science, they for sure are talking about this very idea, that the idea of utopia. If you have never heard about the word called as utopia or eudaimonia, utopia, or as it was called in the ancient Greece, eudaimonia, you might have heard about a word called as, in India, you might have heard people say the word Ram Raj. Or in Pakistan, Imran Khan says, "Hum Madina ki riyasat bana denge." So what are these? These are again the concepts which are very similar to a utopian state. That is a absolute perfect state where the requirement of each and every one is fulfilled. Fine. There is a sense of security and everyone fulfills, everyone's requirement are fulfilled. So all here, at least the text which we are going to discuss as the classical text, usually there will be few others, but most of the texts which we are going to discuss as classical texts in our political science syllabus are pertaining about the situation in society and what can be done to make the society a utopia, to make society a eudaimonia, to make society a Ramraj. Okay, that is what we are going to focus on. समझ आई बात? चलिए. So in your handout on page number 4, I think so, let me just check. Yeah, on page number 4, you will see it is saying what is a classical text, and I'm reading from the screen. Classical text refers to influential writings from the past that have enduring significance and relevance even in the present times, often due to their insights into human nature, society and culture. The eternality factor reflects their ability to speak to the current and even the future generations. And then there are some of the examples, and I have intentionally not given you the examples of the religious text because that is something which everyone already knows. Fine. Now if these are the texts, the very next question is how we are going to study these texts. How we are going to study these texts. Fine. So let's move forward. What are the different approaches? Okay, this is something we have done now. This is how to approach a classical text. What is a classical text? And there are certain examples of the classical text written. Now let's move and discuss about what are the different approaches. What are the different approaches to read classical text? कैसे पढ़ेंगे भाई? How you are going to read different classical text? कैसे पढ़ें? Fine. So whenever you are reading something, एकदम सिंपल सी बात समझिए, अभी जो डिटेल है उस पर नहीं जाता है. You are living in this society. You are living in this society, and I am hoping, if suppose you are you have taken a storybook or a novel or a storybook in your hand, and you have now started reading it. Usually, if you are reading a storybook or a novel, you at least have to be 11 or 12 or 13 year old. I hope so. Now, in that age also, you have been born and brought up, and you have learnt a language in which you are going to study that thing. So you at that age you also, or the tyrant stage of 12 or 13, also teen stage, you'll have certain preconceived notions. You have some preconceived notion, you have born and brought up and raised in a certain fashion. So you have already made some of your predicaments. You have made that this is right, that is wrong, and that is everyone has. Okay, every person in this whole world has certain subconscious or subconscious notions about everything. This is good, this is bad, वो बन जाता है. If you are born and brought up in a certain society, in a certain culture, based on the impact of that society, the culture, these notions comes into play. Now, when you are reading a classical text, and you are reading any classical or any important text, the first objective is that you have to maintain your neutrality. Suppose you are a civil servant. Suppose you are a civil servant. It is expected that you have to read a particular text, and you have to then opine that what needs to be done to resolve a certain problem. Now it is expected of you that you will be unbiased, you will be totally neutral. How you will be unbiased and totally neutral? If you will have a preconceived notion, if you have already biased towards certain thing. Okay. So suppose before becoming a civil servant, you used to roam around a particular street in a Delhi city, and someone stole your phone from a Wadi road. Now you become a superintendent of police in Delhi, and you have been made the in charge of that very road, and someone has been arrested and brought there that this particular guy has been stealing phones on that particular road from last 5 years. Now you know that your phone was also stolen 3 years back. So एक बार तो अभी पूछोगे उससे कि भाई मेरा फोन भी है क्या तेरे पास? And you have already started hating that person because you know कि इसने मेरा फोन भी लिया है. So what is happening? Your preconceived notion, your personal reasoning is impacting your judgment, which should not be the case. Fine. Now, how you will remove that notion from your mind before taking the decision? Whenever you are reading a text, therefore, it is expected that there are different approaches to read a text. There are different approaches. Now, before even we go in detail that what these approaches are, let me tell you here itself that no one approach is better than the other. It totally depends on the circumstances you are in. Fine. It doesn't really matter that one approach, or it doesn't frankly outrightly can be stated that look, approach 1 is better than approach 2. But for that matter, there are 3 approaches, and the 3 approaches, number 1 is the textualist approach. Textualist approach. Don't worry, not only I'll explain this, we'll actually apply these approaches on at least 2 books to give you idea. Textualist approach. Then the second is comparative approach. First is textualist approach, second is comparative approach, and the third is interpretative approach. Third is interpretative approach. Textualist, comparative, interpretative. These 3 approaches are there. We have to discuss them one by one. Let's discuss the textualist approach. What is the textualist approach? That's the question. If I have to explain it in a single line, I can say that what is written, it is. that what is written it is. That is a textualist approach. Let me write this down. Let me write this thing for you. That what is written it is. जो लिखा है वैसा है, खत्म बात. Simple. You don't have to put too much brain into it. ज्यादा दिमाग मत लगाओ, जो लिखा हुआ है वैसा है. Okay? If it's written that Mr. X is a thief who is stealing products on that particular road, then Mr. X is a thief who is actually stealing products on those specific roads. You don't have to put your mind that what if there was someone else also, or you don't have to put too much. What it is written it is. The focus in the textualist approach is to emphasize close reading and analysis of the text itself to understand the author's original intention and ideas and arguments. Okay? Many a time you must have seen in the news that when Supreme Court has some constitutional issue in its front, okay, and there is some confusion that what is written, that what Supreme Court does. Supreme Court goes back to what was the intention. You must have heard about this, that many a time the Supreme Court actually asks for the talking points of the Constituent Assembly, because before even jumping into what is written, the judges of the Supreme Court asked that, okay, when the particular statement was written, what was the intention behind writing that statement? So you focus on the text, that's it. You focus on the text. You don't focus on the society in which it was written. You don't compare it with some other text. You don't look at, अच्छा ये हुआ था क्या? नहीं. What is written in the text? What was the people who wrote that text, were their intention at the time when they wrote that text? That is all you have to focus on. The focus has to be close reading and analysis of the text. There's a very famous scholarly judge. There was, not is. You might have heard about Justice Scalia. Justice Scalia was a judge in United States Supreme Court. He passed away a few years back. So he was considered one of the biggest textualists world has ever seen. Now, what are the methods available to a textualist? So, method is the very careful examination of the language, the structure, and the content of the text. Careful examination of language, structure, and content of the text. Done. Fine? Yeah. Attention has to be given to the nuances. Okay? And author's phrase and words have to be given most importance. The main intention behind doing all this, the goal is to restrict or basically reconstruct the author's intended meaning. Okay? To reconstruct author's intended meaning. It is very simple that the textualist scholars don't think that ये लिखा है तो इसका ये मतलब भी हो सकता है. नहीं, they are not interested in that. They are focusing, this was written because the author was thinking about this particular thing can be solved in this manner, so he wrote that. So that is what textualist approach focuses on. It will make more sense when we will talk about the examples. Let me just explain you the comparative and the interpretative approach also, and then we'll take the similar example and we'll apply all the three approaches on on the same one text, so it will make more sense to you. Now, after the textualist approach, let's move to the comparative approach. After the textualist approach, we are moving to the comparative approach. So as the name suggests, comparative approach is going to compare. As simple as that. Comparative approach is going to compare. What is going to compare? Is it going to compare two books? Yes, it can. So it concentrates the focus. The concentration is on comparing and contrasting the ideas, argument, and themes of different classical texts, authors, and intellectual tradition who are usually from the same period. Fine. So, for example, Ramayana could be compared to Ramcharitmanas. The various works of William Shakespeare will be compared among each other. Okay. So comparative approach always focuses on that in the same time zone, in the same time period, how two different texts could be compared and all. So that you have to focus on. What are the methods available to the comparative scholars? So they try to identify the similarities, they try to identify the differences, they try to observe the pattern of the text obviously, and then the systematic structured manner. So they basically compare the structure, the language, all those things which was done in a textualist approach in independent capacity in the comparative approach that is done between two or more texts. Suppose someone wants to compare the ideological orientation of Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru. There are a lot of similarities between Mr. Nehru and Mr. Bose, and those are like, for example, both were left-leaning leaders, both were almost of the similar age group, both were nationalist leaders. Okay, but there are differences in their seminal text, there are some differences in their opinions. How you will get to know about this? By taking a comparative approach. What is the goal? The goal here is not to reconstruct the author's main agenda. Here the goal is to develop a broader understanding of the intellectual landscape of a particular time period. Instead of focusing on one author whose text is being analyzed, comparative approach is to be taken when you are trying to understand through the text the period, the time frame in which it was written. Fine. So that is comparative approach. Now the third one comes, and this is basically which is most preferred by the scholars after 1980s. As few minutes back I was telling you that we live in a postmodernist world. क्या ही सही है, क्या ही गलत, हम उस वाली दुनिया में रहते हैं. So for us it is the most acceptable one. Although as a civil servant you cannot say you have to use all three equally when and in whatever situation it is required. So interpretative approach, interpretative approach. Now what is going to be? As it says interpretative, so there has to be some form of interpretation, there will be some form of inference making. So basically what they are going to do, they are going to explore the meaning and the significance and the implication of any classical text. Okay, by engaging in a process of interpretation and contextualization. So not only they will read the text from the author's point of view, neither they are going to discuss a text and compare it with the other scholarly work done around the same period, but they will look into the time period, they will look into the conditioning, they will try to understand that under what circumstances these texts were written. Okay, so the context of the text plays the most important role. You might have heard this thing that बिना context के text मत सुनो. That is because of the interpretative approach. Something is stated under certain circumstances. If you remove the circumstances, that particular statement makes totally abruptly no meaning. Okay. So, for example, Gandhiji says, "Do or die." He says it in 1942 during Quit India movement. Okay. But if you remove that all that conceptuality and just say that Gandhiji is saying about either doing it or dying, then you will immediately say कि अरे ये तो terrorist type आदमी है भाई. But we know that he was a saint of non-violence. Fine. So the context of any text is the most essential thing. Now the method which was used by the interpretative scholars, it involves situating the text within their historical, cultural, social and political context. That is what I was telling you, that you have to keep the text within the realm in which it was spoken, in which it was written, and then accordingly you will be coming to a final conclusion that what it actually meant. The aim of the interpretative approach is to illuminate the broader implication and relevance of the text, both their original audience and for the contemporary political science debates and issues. It is important, and this is actually the most prevalent one in the modern times. Again, I am telling this thing that interpretative approach is the most prevalent in the modern times among the liberal scholars and all, but you as an aspiring civil servant has to take all three of them on the equal footing. So these are the three texts which you need to understand, and now we'll move and we'll take examples, making sure it will make more sense to you. So these are different approaches to read a classical text. Approaches: textualist, comparative and interpretive approach, focus, method and goal. Each one is defined. What I have given to you, the information is already tabulated over here. Now once you have understood, or it has made some sense to you that what is going to happen in textualist approach, what is going to happen in comparative approach, and what is exactly going to happen in interpretative approach, let's move forward and let's take an example. Let's take an example where it will be making more sense. So few minutes back we were talking about the text by Niccolo Machiavelli. Okay, so let's take two examples. Let's take example from the Western world and let's take one example from the Indian world. It will make more sense. So in the Western world, abhi kuch der pehle we were talking about Niccolo Machiavelli and his book The Prince. So let's take example of that. So just again, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote the famous book The Prince, while living in Florence, and where the ruler was Medici's. And in this text he propounded that how the ethical and moral standard which is expected to be maintained by the ruler is different from the ethical and moral standard which is expected to be maintained by the subjects. This is the very basic idea. Okay, so that you keep in mind. Now this was done in 16th century. It has been considered a lot of time a controversial text, because he was in a way, by saying that the moral and ethical standards for the common people and the monarchs are separate, or the ruler and the common people are separate, he was giving a leeway to the ruling elite. Okay, he was giving a leeway to the ruling elite. So this is a criticism of his. You just remember this much. We will discuss about it in a minute. Now another text which we have to discuss is about Hind Swaraj. So Hind Swaraj is a text which was written by Gandhiji, in which he extensively detailed out, okay, not only that he criticized the British colonial regime, but he also talked about non-violent resistance and self-reliance as the tool to achieve Swaraj in Hind, that is Hindustan. Okay, so Indian culture, values, it's important, all those things have been discussed by Gandhiji in this text. It was written in 1909 while he was coming back from Britain. He wrote this text. Just keep this thing in mind. Now let's talk about one by one all three of the, basically now 6 categories. So let's apply The Prince. Let's take the text, The Prince. Okay, The Prince. Okay, and apply the textualist approach on it. So as per textualist approach, what you will say about the book? The intention of Machiavelli, what it was here? The intention of Machiavelli was to tell the Medici family, or the ruler there, Lorenzo de Medici, that his grandson has been born, and this is how he should teach or educate his grandson, so that over the period he will become a good ruler or capable ruler, more than good, great and capable ruler. So intention is focus on the pragmatic guide for the ruler, analyze the necessity of ruthlessness to maintain the authority in the state, and It is considered a detached analysis to maintain, to understand the political reality. That is the textualist approach analysis of the prince, because that was the intention of Machiavelli, or Machiavelli, while writing this text. Let's take a comparative approach. Now, when we are going to compare the text Machiavelli by the other text which was written in the nearby time, you can compare it with the text. Okay, this is a textualist approach. Then you take a comparative approach. For the comparative approach, you need to understand the prince was written in the 16th century. In the 17th century, you have a scholar, someone like Thomas Hobbes. You can compare the Thomas Hobbes idea of state, and you can compare it with the Machiavellian idea. And after comparing that only, you said that he is ruthless. Fine. So compare the work of Hobbes, Leviathan, and if possible, you can compare even Plato's idea of republic, which was he propounded in Republic. So that could be done. It highlights differences between the Machiavellian idea of realism and the other thinkers' idealism. Whether it was Hobbes, he was an idealist. Even Plato was a idealist, but Machiavelli is a realist. This is a subjective idea. Who is idealist, who is realist? These are subjective idea, and because of comparative approach only, we have concluded that Machiavelli is a realist and Hobbes is a idealist. Okay. It also reveals similarities in analysis of power dynamics and human nature. When we compared it with other books, we understand that he was emphasizing more on power dynamics. So that is also a work which you would not have understood if you just have taken the textualist approach. On the interpretative side, a lot of scholars have reached on to this conclusion that in the way the society was there, the Italian society, the fragmented Italian society of the 16th century, Machiavelli's work, The Prince, was actually a sarcastic work. It was a criticism of the society and the polity of those times in the Western world. Okay, so you put the text, the observations of Machiavelli. So why Machiavelli is saying that the society is incapable, or society needs to be ruthlessly handled by the monarch, or the ethical and the moral standards have to be different? Why he gave the monarch or the ruler the leeway to act in the way to maintain his authority? Because he knew there was instability in the society. So basically, when you keep the text in the period in which it was written, you will find that it was a critical work which highlighted the problems and difficulties in the Italian society. So this observation could only be made if you have taken the interpretative approach to understand Machiavellian text, The Prince. Now let's talk about on a non-violent side. This is a highly radicalized side, highly pragmatic side. Let's talk about Hind Swaraj, written by Gandhiji in 1909. Hind Swaraj. Now, again, the textualist approach, what it will say? He outrightly criticized the British Empire. He not only highlighted but actually eulogized the Indian values, Indian ethical value set, and advocated non-violent resistance as the way forward, as the tool to achieve Swaraj. And that is what his intention was, that is what he has written in his text. So that is the outcome through the textualist approach. If you take a comparative approach, so whose work you are going to compare Gandhi's work with? So Gandhi was a nationalist. You will compare his work with the other Indian nationalists. You can compare his work with Nehru's work. You can compare his work with Dadabhai Nauroji's work. And it highlights the difference between Gandhi's emphasis on non-violence and Gandhi's influence on culture. Suppose if you compare Gandhi's work or Gandhi's writings in Hind Swaraj with Dadabhai Nauroji's work of poverty and un-British rule in India, both were nationalists. Both were writing somewhat in a difference of 30-40 years. In 2000 years of history, to 30-40 years is not a big time. But you will see that Gandhi is focusing more on the culture perspective of Indian society, whereas Nehruji was focusing more on the economic perspective. So that is a comparative study. That is an outcome of comparative approach. When you compare the Nehruvian writings or Nehru's writing and you compare Gandhi's writing, you will see that Nehru was a left-leaning socialist. Gandhi was not. Gandhi was someone who was focusing on welfareism, but Gandhi cannot be considered a socialist. Okay? He was against any form of state institutionalization. So that can be highlighted. But at the same time, it can also be highlighted in showing the relationship between almost all the nationalists, Indian nationalists in the 20th century. And that is the concept of social justice was highlighted. So that you can remember. On the interpretative side, first what you have to do for interpretative approach, you have to keep the text in the period in which it was written. That is 1909's Britain or 1909's India. Parliamentary reform was getting passed. Okay. Hind Swaraj is a foundational text of Indian independence movement. It was written after Surat split. It was written after Swadeshi and boycott movement has taken place. It was written before Gandhi came back to India. So you just keep that thing and explore how Gandhi's approach of Swaraj was still evolving. The Gandhian idea of Swaraj, which came into prominence for the very first time in 1920 during the Khilafat and the non-cooperation movement, and then evolved further in 1930s and 1942 in civil disobedience and Quit India movement respectively, you will see what? That the origin is in the writing of Hind Swaraj. This text is actually famous because it gave the very basic definition of what Swaraj meant for Gandhiji. It didn't only meant of independence or removal of the colonial power, but it also meant the improvement or development of the self capacity to be capable of ruling yourself. That is where the word Swaraj came from. So what we have done, we have used a textualist, comparative and interpretative approach on two important texts, two seminal texts. The Hind Swaraj is a seminal text, is a classical text when we are talking about Indian society, because Swaraj plays a very important role in Indian constitution. And Machiavelli's The Prince plays act as a classical work in the world of realism. Even in the present day and time, on the global platform, there is no standard government. There is still a phase of anarchy in the world situation, world forums. Everyone is for themselves only. Okay? So for those situations, you will see the realistic approach which Machiavelli took in the 16th century is even implementable as the 21st century. And that is why these texts are required and needed to be studied. Okay? Now, these all information is actually written on your handout, page number 5. Okay? These all information is already written on your handout, page number 5. This is some basic text about Machiavelli's Prince and Hind Swaraj by Mahatma Gandhi. Since I had to give you the example, and obviously by the time you will be preparing and you will be more into your preparatory phase, you will be knowing these texts anyway. Even if you are GS student, you will be knowing about Hind Swaraj and in most prominence the Prince also. But for a political science students, in the initial phase I have told you these texts. Later on stages I won't be required to give you the text name as such or the basic this kind of information. This will be in your mind anyway. And then finally on the next slide you will see the approach has been the three approaches have been applied one by one on the two texts so that comparison could be done. Fine. So this is where I think we should wrap our today's class, because once you have understood now that how the classical texts have to be studied, then the next step is to start the Western political thought. That is, we will start from the Fabian, or sorry, the pre-Socratic society. And I'll just show you a diagram which will be, this is a diagram. The Greek political thought is the first phase of Western political thought which we will start from. Your syllabus actually talks about Plato and Aristotle, but Socrates is somewhat reached out in the questions now. So we have to study about Socrates, as well as in Plato's text, his seminal text Republic also, Socrates has been shown as a character. So you need to know about Socrates also. And now it has been observed that in the past few years, questions have also been asked from the writings of other pre-Socratic scholars, since this is the line which shows pre-Socratic scholars, and the scholars like Heraclitus and Parmenides plays a very vital role. So about them also you need to know some important things. There are two options. Either we can start directly from going from Plato, and while talking about Plato we can talk a bit about Socrates, or and then whenever there will be a question about where we have to where it will be needed to go back and talk a bit here tidbit about pre-Socratic scholars, we can do it. Or the other way is you chronologically just finish off the important school of thought which were available before Plato, and then in seamless manner you can approach Plato, and then you continuously go there. I frankly always suggest to students that anyway when you ultimately have to read the pre-Socratic scholars also, so then why not study them on the very first day? It might take 40 or 50 minutes more of your time, but since on the very first day if they will be taught in a chronological order, that who came first should be taught first, it will make more sense to you and it will be easy to remember. So that is where we will be starting the lectures in the we'll start the lecture in the next session, and let's catch up and we'll start from there. Fine. So I hope this session must have made a lot of sense to you. Make sure to download the PDF file and then only attend the lecture, and also make sure that it's on YouTube. So make sure that you push the like button and subscribe the channel if you haven't done that. That will be all for now. Have a nice day. Let's catch up in the next lecture. Thank you.